Barron Trump's car came to a sudden halt as a group of bikers surrounded it on a quiet stretch of road. What started as a tense standoff quickly turned into something no one could have anticipated. What happened next will leave you absolutely speechless. The road stretched ahead, lined with tall pine trees that swayed gently in the breeze. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind of day when the world seemed to slow down just a little. The golden sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting a dappled pattern on the asphalt. Birds chirped in the distance, their songs barely audible over the hum of Barron Trump's sleek black car as it glided along the empty road. Inside the car, Barron sat in the back seat, lost in thought. Dressed in a simple yet crisp outfit, he looked out the window, watching the landscape blur by. His driver, a man in his early 40s with a calm demeanor, occasionally glanced in the rearview mirror, checking on Barron. The atmosphere inside the car was peaceful, a sharp contrast to what lay ahead. Then, without warning, the serenity of the moment shattered. The sound of roaring engines erupted in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Barron leaned forward slightly, his curiosity piqued. Ahead on the road, a group of bikers emerged from a bend, their motorcycles gleaming under the sunlight. They moved as one, their formation tight and deliberate. As the car approached, the bikers slowed down, their intention becoming clear. The driver instinctively pressed the brakes, bringing the vehicle to a cautious stop. The bikers surrounded the car, their engines idling but growling like caged beasts. Their leather jackets bore emblems of a local club, and their faces were partially obscured by helmets, making it hard to read their expressions. Inside the car, the atmosphere shifted. The driver's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension. Barron, however, remained calm, his eyes scanning the scene outside. There was no immediate sign of aggression, but the situation was undeniably unsettling. The bikers exchanged glances, and one of them, a tall man with a commanding presence, stepped forward, removing his helmet. The stage was set for an encounter that would change everything. The air felt heavy as the group of bikers stood around the car, their presence commanding attention. Barron could see the leader of the group through the windshield, a tall man with a weathered face, his piercing eyes locked on the vehicle. The driver shifted uneasily in his seat, glancing back at Barron for a moment, as if silently asking what to do. Barron's curiosity outweighed his apprehension. "Let's see what they want," he said calmly, his tone measured. He had learned to stay composed in unexpected situations, but even he wasn't sure what to expect this time. The leader of the bikers stepped closer, his boots crunching on the gravel at the roadside. He raised a hand, signaling for his group to hold their positions. Then, leaning down slightly, he motioned for the driver to lower the window. The driver hesitated, but a quick nod from Barron encouraged him to comply. The window rolled down and the biker leaned in, his rugged face just inches away. "We're not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice deep but not hostile. "But we need a moment of your time." The ambiguity of his words made the driver tense up, his hand instinctively hovering near the car's control panel. Barron, however, leaned forward, his expression calm but inquisitive. "What is this about?" he asked, his tone steady. The biker straightened up, looking past the driver and directly at Barron. "You've got influence," he said bluntly. "And there's something going on in our town that we can't handle alone." The tension in the air thickened. The other bikers exchanged glances, their body language suggesting they were unsure how Barron would respond. Barron's gaze didn't waver as he studied the man in front of him. "Go on," he prompted, his voice firm but not dismissive. The biker hesitated for a moment, then sighed deeply. "There's a development project coming up that's going to tear through the heart of our community. It's more than just land. It's homes, families, and everything we've built over generations. We've tried fighting it through the usual channels, but no one's listening to us. We're being ignored." Barron listened intently, his mind processing the weight of the man's words. He could see the frustration etched into the biker's face, the kind that came from fighting a battle that seemed impossible to win. "And you think I can help?" Barron asked, his voice laced with genuine curiosity. "You're someone people notice," the biker replied, his tone softening. "If you speak up, maybe they'll finally pay attention." The ask was unexpected, and it carried a sense of urgency. Barron didn't reply immediately, letting the words sink in. He glanced at the group of bikers, their faces a mixture of hope and apprehension. They were counting on him, a stranger, to make a difference in a fight that wasn't his own. But as Barron sat there, he realized the situation wasn't as distant from him as it seemed. He understood what it felt like to be overlooked, to have people make assumptions about you without understanding your reality. And in that moment, he knew he couldn't just drive away. This wasn't just their fight. It was a test of his character. Barron took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "Let's talk," he said, gesturing for the biker to step back from the car. The leader hesitated, then signaled for his group to give them some space. The bikers backed away, their heavy boots crunching on the gravel, but their watchful eyes stayed fixed on the scene. The driver looked at Barron, uncertainty clear in his expression. "Are you sure about this?" he whispered, his voice low. Barron turned to him, a faint smile on his lips. Sometimes, doing the right thing isn't about being sure. It's about listening first. He opened the car door and stepped out, straightening his jacket. The air outside was brisk, filled with a mix of diesel fumes from passing trucks and the earthy scent of the roadside. The bikers were a rugged group, their leather jackets scuffed and patched, their expressions a blend of suspicion and hope. Barron's presence immediately shifted the energy. There was no fear, only calm determination. The leader stepped forward again. "The name's Frank," he said, holding out a calloused hand. "Barron," he replied, shaking it firmly. "Let's hear what you've got." Frank motioned toward a nearby clearing, away from the road's noise. As the group walked over, Barron noticed the subtle dynamics among the bikers. Some looked unsure, others guarded, and a few had a glimmer of trust in their eyes. It was clear they didn't take risks like this lightly. Frank pulled out a folded map from his jacket and spread it out on the hood of one of the bikes. The paper was worn, with creases and marks showing how often it had been studied. "This here," Frank said, pointing to a shaded area, "is where the development project's set to break ground. They're calling it progress, but for us it's destruction. Families live here. My family lives here, and once the bulldozers roll in, it's gone." Barron studied the map carefully. The shaded area covered a substantial portion of the land, stretching into what appeared to be a tight-knit community. Houses, small businesses, and even a school were marked on the map. He could feel the weight of what Frank was saying. This wasn't just a patch of land. It was a home to countless people. "Why hasn't anyone stepped in to help?" Barron asked, his gaze meeting Frank's. Barron's jaw tightened. "We've tried everything. Petitions, protests, even reaching out to local officials. But the developers have deep pockets, and they've bought their way through every obstacle. The media barely covers it, and the town council, let's just say they're not on our side." A younger biker chimed in, his voice tinged with frustration. "We're running out of time. Once they start digging, there's no turning back." Barron felt a spark of determination ignite within him. He wasn't sure how yet, but he knew he couldn't stand by and do nothing. "What do you need from me?" he asked, his tone steady. Frank hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "We need visibility. Someone with your platform could shine a light on this, make people pay attention. If the right people see what's happening, maybe, just maybe, we can stop it." The weight of their request hung in the air. Barron glanced around at the group, their faces a mixture of desperation and hope. He thought about the power of his name, the influence it carried. It wasn't something he asked for, but it was something he could use, for good. "All right," he said finally. "I'll help." Relief washed over the group, but Barron knew this was just the beginning. "I need to see it for myself," he added. "I want to meet the people who are affected, hear their stories. If we're going to fight this, it has to be real." Frank nodded, respect evident in his eyes. "We can take you there." The group mounted their bikes, engines roaring to life, and Barron climbed back into the car. As they made their way toward the town, he couldn't help but feel the magnitude of what lay ahead. This wasn't just about helping a community. It was about standing up for what was right, even when the odds were stacked against them. When they arrived, the town was exactly as Frank had described. A close-knit community, with small houses, kids playing in the yards, and neighbors chatting on porches. But there was an undercurrent of unease, a sense that the clock was ticking. Barron stepped out of the car, and the townspeople turned to look at him. Whispers spread quickly, and soon a small crowd had gathered. Frank stepped forward, introducing Barron and explaining why he was there. The skepticism in their eyes slowly gave way to cautious hope as Barron began to speak. "I'm here to listen," he said simply. "Tell me your stories. Let's make sure the world hears them." One by one, the townspeople shared their fears and frustrations. A mother spoke about the school her children would lose. An elderly man described the house he had built with his own hands. And a local shop owner talked about the community that had supported him through tough times. Each story added to the weight on Barron's shoulders, but it also strengthened his resolve. As the sun began to set, Barron stood in the center of the crowd, addressing them with a calm but powerful voice. "We're going to fight this together," he said, "and we're not going to stop until we're heard." The crowd erupted into applause, their spirits lifted by his determination. But Barron knew the hardest part was yet to come. They had taken the first step, but the journey ahead would test them all. The meeting with the townspeople had been eye-opening for Barron, but the weight of their stories stayed with him as they left the small community that evening. Frank and the other bikers escorted his car back to a nearby diner, a quiet place where they could regroup and figure out the next steps. Barron sat in a corner booth, staring at the worn map that Frank had shown him earlier, his mind racing with possibilities. Frank slid into the booth across from him. "You've already done more than most people would," he said, his tone softer now. "But you should know, there's a lot of risk if we take this further." Barron looked up, his expression steady. "What kind of risk?" Frank hesitated before answering. "The developers don't like being challenged. They've got resources, lawyers, and people willing to do whatever it takes to silence us. If you get involved, they'll come after you too." The air between them grew heavy with the weight of those words. Barron considered the warning, the enormity of what they were up against. But before he could respond, the sound of a bell jingling above the diner door broke the silence. A man in a crisp suit entered, his sharp gaze immediately locking onto Barron. He walked over with calculated steps and stopped at the booth. "Mr. Trump," the man said smoothly, pulling out a business card and placing it on the table. "My name is Richard Lane. I represent the developers overseeing the project you seem to have taken an interest in." Frank tensed immediately, his jaw tightening, but Barron held up a hand to keep him calm. "What can I do for you, Mr. Lane?" he asked evenly. Lane's smile was cold, almost rehearsed. I wanted to extend a friendly warning. It would be in everyone's best interest if you stepped away from this matter. The project is already in motion, and no amount of publicity will stop it. Getting involved would only complicate things, for you and for them." He nodded toward Frank. Barron leaned back, studying the man. "And by complicate, you mean threaten, don't you?" Lane's smile faltered for just a moment before returning. "We don't threaten, Mr. Trump. We resolve issues efficiently. But if you insist on pursuing this..." He let the sentence hang in the air, the implied threat clear. Frank started to rise from his seat, but Barron placed a calming hand on his arm. "It's all right, Frank." Then turning back to Lane, he said, "Let me make this clear. I don't respond well to threats, implied or otherwise. If anything, you've just given me more reason to see this through." Lane's composure slipped slightly, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Without another word, he turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing in the now silent diner. Frank exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You didn't have to do that, Barron. These people don't play fair." "I know," Barron replied, his voice firm, "but someone has to stand up to them. And if it's not us, then who?" That night, Barron reached out to a trusted journalist who specialized in exposing corruption. He shared everything: the stories from the townspeople, the threats from the developers, and the stakes involved. Within hours, the journalist agreed to run a feature story, bringing national attention to the issue. Barron's name carried weight, and it was enough to get the story picked up by major outlets. But what happened next caught everyone off guard. The story went viral within days, sparking a wave of public outcry. Social media was flooded with messages of support for the town, with people sharing their own stories of losing homes to unchecked development. Donations began pouring in to help the community fund legal representation, and activists from across the country started organizing protests at the development site. The developers, caught off guard by the overwhelming backlash, scrambled to control the narrative. They issued a statement claiming the project was beneficial to the town, but it only fueled more outrage. Richard Lane's name was dragged into the spotlight, and past allegations of unethical practices resurfaced, forcing him to step down from his position. Meanwhile, Barron returned to the town, greeted by cheers and gratitude from the people he had fought for. But the most surprising moment came when Frank approached him, holding an envelope with trembling hands. "This came for you," Frank said, handing it over. Barron opened the envelope to find a handwritten letter from the head of the development company. It read, "Mr. Trump, we've reviewed the situation and decided to halt the project indefinitely. We underestimated the resolve of the community and the impact of your advocacy. While we still stand by our intentions, we cannot ignore the voices that have risen against us. Thank you for reminding us of what truly matters. Sincerely, John Everett." Barron read the letter aloud to the crowd gathered around him. Cheers erupted, tears of joy streaming down the faces of people who had almost lost everything. Frank clapped him on the back, his gruff demeanor softened by emotion. "You did it," Frank said, his voice thick with gratitude. Barron shook his head. "We did it. Together." The victory wasn't just for the town. It was a testament to the power of standing up for what's right, even when the odds seemed impossible. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the small town, the air buzzed with a mix of relief and celebration. People began gathering at the community center, a place that had been their refuge through months of uncertainty. Barron Trump stood among them, his presence no longer an anomaly, but a symbol of hope. Frank stepped forward first, his weathered face softened by a rare smile. "I didn't think anyone would fight for us, let alone someone like you," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "But you didn't just fight. You reminded us that we're not invisible. You gave us a voice." The room erupted in applause, and Barron felt a lump rise in his throat. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, but the sincerity in their gratitude was overwhelming. A young mother approached him next, her toddler clinging to her leg. Her eyes shimmered with tears as she said, "Because of you, my son will grow up in the home where I was raised. You saved more than just our houses. You saved our memories." Barron bent down, ruffling the toddler's hair. He said with a smile. The boy giggled, the sound light and full of innocence, a stark contrast to the tension that had weighed on the town just days ago. At the back of the room, an elderly man leaned on his cane, his voice booming above the chatter. "This town has seen its share of hard times, but what you did," he paused, his voice trembling, "you gave us something we thought we'd lost. Dignity. You reminded us that we matter." Barron nodded. He replied, "I just helped make sure others saw it too." As the evening unfolded, the once fragile community felt whole again. Strangers shared stories, neighbors hugged, and laughter echoed through the hall. Frank, now standing by Barron's side, handed him a small framed photo. It was a black and white image of the town's first settlers, smiling proudly in front of newly built homes. "This is our history," Frank said, his voice heavy with emotion. "And now, thanks to you, we can add a new chapter, one where we didn't back down." Barron studied the photo, his fingers tracing the edges of the frame. "I think you all wrote that chapter," he said softly. "I just turned the page." Outside, the glow of string lights illuminated the night, casting a warm, almost magical ambiance over the gathering. A group of children ran past, their laughter ringing out as they chased fireflies. One of them stopped abruptly, a girl no older than 10. She looked up at Barron with wide eyes and said, "Are you going to stay, Mr. Trump?" Barron knelt down to her level. "Not forever," he admitted, "but I'll always keep you in my heart, and I'll always be here if you need me." The girl smiled shyly before running off to join her friends. Watching her disappear into the crowd, Barron felt a deep sense of fulfillment he hadn't anticipated. This wasn't just about saving a town. It was about igniting a spark of hope that would continue to burn long after he left. The night ended with Frank raising a toast. To Barron, and to the strength we didn't know we had until he helped us find it. Glasses clinked, cheers erupted, and for the first time in a long time, the town felt like a place of possibility again. Barron stood quietly, taking it all in. This wasn't his town, but tonight it felt like home. As Barron Trump drove away from the small town, the events of the past weeks replayed in his mind like a heartfelt montage. The laughter of children, the tearful gratitude of families, and the unwavering resilience of people who refused to be forgotten left a lasting imprint on his soul. This wasn't just a chapter in their lives, it was a lesson that transcended geography, status, or circumstance. The truth was simple but profound. Kindness and action can ripple through lives in ways we may never fully understand. What had started as an ordinary day had turned into an extraordinary journey, simply because Barron had chosen to listen and act. He hadn't set out to change the world, but by standing up for what was right, he had transformed a community, and in the process found a deeper sense of purpose within himself. The lesson wasn't just for Barron, it was for all of us. It's easy to walk past someone in need, to dismiss a community's struggle as not our problem. But what if, just once, we stopped to ask, what can I do? What if we chose to believe that our small acts of kindness could create monumental change? Life often places us at crossroads, Barron realized. We can choose to be bystanders, or we can step forward, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. The latter takes courage, but it also brings rewards that far outweigh the effort. It's not about grand gestures or being in the spotlight. It's about making choices that align with empathy, integrity, and compassion. For Barron, this experience had reinforced the idea that true wealth isn't measured in material possessions, but in the connections we make and the lives we touch. He understood now that even a single act of kindness, a listening ear, a helping hand, could change someone's life forever.